Hello, Dimitra here. I made the brilliant choice to get vaccinated for COVID and flu on the same day, which means that I am absolutely chock full of antibodies right now. But unfortunately, I am not producing very coherent audio for your enjoyment. So instead of having you all listen to me falling asleep on mic, we decided to go back through our Patreon bonus episodes and release one of those for our listeners in the main feed, and also to drop a new episode into the Patreon feed for our patrons. I hope you all had a wonderful and restful holiday season. We'll be back on our regular schedule with a new lineup of weird crimes in 2024. Until then, enjoy us talking about Babylon Berlin. This is Demetria Spinrad.
And this is Isaac Meyer, and I feel like the only appropriate way to start this episode is with some ominous music as a series of blurry images slowly appear in front of you, and a little, spinny thing is kind of, I don't know. I don't know what that's supposed to be.
What's that style of German filmmaking called? Is it symbolism or expressionism? Or I'm not really
God,
up on
that
my
level of film history is just beyond me. I call it the weird German period to distinguish it from all the other times that German art has been weird.
All right, so we are talking about probably one of our favorite shows ever covering that weird German period, Babylon Berlin, which is set in the late 20s, early 30s in Germany. I'm going to set some ground rules here. We are pretty liberal with the spoilers, but I would say let's not spoil the fourth season because that has not been released in the States yet. We've done a little internet trickery with our VPNs to make that one work for us, but it hasn't officially been released on Netflix. I don't know if it will, because Netflix is doing some really weird things with screwing around with the kind of IP it's acquiring. I hope it does. I think it's one of its best seasons. But let's talk about the first three seasons of Babylon Berlin.
Which is going to be a challenge because I'm looking back at the production history, and the first two seasons came out in 2017. Season 3 came out in 2020. Season 4 came out in 2022. This show has had a wild production history, and it hadn't occurred to me that I watched the original series 6 years ago. It has
Yeah,
been I took a little out of time in the States, so probably 5 years ago, but it has been a while.
it has been a
Uh,
while, and it's a really expensive show to produce too, right? I think
yeah,
it's one of the most
they
yeah,
built
the
a
most
whole fake like 20s Weimar German style lot to shoot all of this stuff in.
Mm-hmm. It is a really remarkable devotion to historical accuracy in terms of the sets, the costumes, the music. They composed a couple new songs because there are actually a surprising number of dance sequences in this very serious detective show.
Yes, some of them
But
quite ominous. There's a lot of ominous dancing.
really good ominous dancing. I love the ominous dance sequences. But yeah, this is a show that is very, very committed to accuracy. Yeah, it's like Isaac said, a huge amount of it is filmed on location, so you don't get that kind of floaty effect that you sometimes get when directors are over reliant on green screening everything. Everything just feels like physically everyone is in the room, it's real, it's weighty, but there's still amazing action sequences happening, and it's still, I would say, a really good detective show, although it always gets a little weird.
It is, especially season 3 verges into some real wild magical realism. But I mean, it is a show that tries to be very grounded. There are some actual historical figures who appear throughout the show. If I remember correctly, Paul von Hindenburg shows up at one point.
Mm-hmm.
Others are characters who are based on real people, but some modifications have been made. And a lot of the kind of core plot arcs are at least loosely based in history. So there's a whole recurring plot around the German military secretly rearming and violating the Treaty of Versailles, and doing so via a secret agreement with the Soviet Union. And that actually happened. That is a real, verified historical fact. That is a core part of the show's narrative, but is also it is a replication of the actual history of the Weimar period.
Yeah, this is really interesting because the last show we talked about, Karamora, I feel like that show was supposed to sort of take you by the hand and lead you through a period of history, while also having some wild vampire sequences in it. This show actually doesn't really lead you through that history in the same way. I would say it does the opposite thing, where your knowledge as the audience of what is coming up in history lends what is happening in this show some unexpected weight, in a really interesting way that I actually don't see a lot of period pieces making the choice to do this. Your understanding of what is coming next, especially in the season with the stock market crash, and especially as we get more into the rise of the Nazi Party in later seasons, you're it's not supposed to be presented to the audience as like, oh no, what could happen, anything could happen. You as an audience member know what will happen, and that makes some of what is happening on screen very interesting.
It adds a layer to a lot of what's happening because, of course, you see all of these various attempts to try and kind of protect the Weimar Republic, the kind of the interwar Republican system, um, and people fighting very hard to do that. And you kind of know from the jump that they're not going to win, but that also kind of leads, that's kind of what's sympathetic about their cause. Also, that they are the good guys fighting, terrible people. Um, it's interesting, especially the way this show treats Nazis. It does two things that I think are really smart. In early seasons, the show really kind of starts in like 1928, if I remember correctly, and the Nazis are not that much of a presence. They're alluded to a couple times, but that's it. And the early villains, and it kind of fits the history of the period, are more like conservative monarchists who want to bring back the old German Empire. And it's really starting late in season 2 and then into season 3 and now season 4, where the Nazis, kind of following the trajectory of history, become increasingly prominent and are much more kind of relevant to the story, which is kind of lends them this weighty ominousness beyond the fact that they are Nazis, that you just kind of see their numbers swelling even as the kind of good guys are racking up wins in defense of the Republic and bringing people to justice.
Yeah, there is kind of a doomed quality to rooting for the protagonists, which is a fascinating. I think this show is technically classified as neo noir. I've seen a lot of people calling it neo noir, and that's a very interesting way to do a sort of cynical noir aesthetic. Is to, from the very beginning of the show that the protagonist's cause is doomed, but it is still worth fighting for.
And I mean, I think the other thing this show does really well, and just kind of to face this head on, it is a little bit going into season 4, but I feel comfortable doing it this once. It is not. It does not pull punches about describing the Nazi ideology, what it is, and what it looks like. In a lot of ways that I think are really smart, because in American shows, Nazis are usually just kind of cackly villains. This show has them talking about their ideology in very frank terms. One of the things I have to say I really personally appreciate, I think a lot of American shows or movies tend to satirize racism and anti-Semitism in the Nazi Party. They view it as so fundamentally kind of like ridiculous, who could believe this, that it's not really dealt with. This show does not do that, and I think it helps to clarify what the Nazis are. It's also a show that doesn't buy into kind of the self-serving myths I sometimes see American shows do, where they show the Nazi Party as very kind of like efficient and scary. They are scary, but they're also like dipshit street thugs who spend a lot of time fighting each other. Like there's recurring plot arcs about the different branches of the Nazi Party fighting each other, or like the SA, the brown shirts, fighting the SS as they're kind of ascending to power. And moments like that, I think that very kind of frank depiction of the reality of Nazi politics is not something, again, you really see in a lot of American media. And I think it is, I mean, it makes it for hard viewing because it's not a sanitized depiction of the Nazis. But I think it is really valuable for establishing who they are and what the threat they present to the system is.
Yeah, I would say that is definitely one of, I mean, there's so many strong points of the series. It is Is it one of the highest rated series ever filmed? I mean,
In
it
Germany, I
is
believe
up
so.
there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it is way up there. It is on every level a masterpiece of filmmaking, in a way that is really, really fun to watch. But yeah, it is a frank look at some things that I mean, I literally work for a Holocaust organization. I am exposed to quite a bit of, as far as depictions of the Holocaust go, and yet some of those scenes with the Nazis, they are frank about the ideology. They are frank about the consequences of that ideology. And they're filmed so well, so masterfully, in a way that always has you nervous about a character who is in that situation, in a way that I don't think I've ever had quite that visceral experience, watching a World War II movie or any movie around World War II or in the lead up to World War II before. It is, I mean, it really gets you.
It really does. It's a okay. I one more season 4 spoiler because it's on my mind. Obviously, this is the season we watched most recently. There is a like one of the early criticisms of the show is that it doesn't deal that much with the Jewish community in Germany that's under attack as all of this is happening. Apparently the creators listened to that one, and in season 4 it's a big part of the story. And in particular, there is one scene showing a Jewish family doing a Shabbat dinner that is entirely in Yiddish and is like one of the most moving things I've ever seen on television. Like, it got me pretty good, which is another reason I really appreciate this show. And I'm gonna be honest, I usually expect Gentiles to just not really care about getting that kind of stuff right. And the fact that, as far as I know, all three of the showrunners are Gentiles and they did, like, I doubt they're listening to weird Patreon fan casts about their TV show, but if they are, thank you. I appreciate it. I see the work. I appreciate it.
Yeah, okay, I really want to talk about representation in this show, because this is, if you haven't guessed by now from some of the ways I talk about media, I write primarily science fiction, which means that I travel through quite a few bubbles of discussion of how science fiction is written now, how it used to be written, how it should be written. And I have some pretty strong opinions about some writing advice that is being given to people and some of the industry trends, that are going on right now. And I think, especially in the American publishing industry and the American media industry more broadly, there is an there's a very, prescriptive view of what representation should be, what good representation is. Your protagonist should be a role model for the whatever marginalized group is being represented, and I feel like this show is a really good counter argument to that, because there are a lot of characters in this show. Obviously, like Isaac said, the Jewish representation didn't start out as great. A lot of the Jewish characters who did exist in the early episodes of the show kind of existed to suffer and sometimes get blown up. But I would say this is a show that does a pretty good job overall of mixing in a lot of characters from marginalized groups, that are not going to fare so well very soon in history. And that lends an additional weight to the fact that history continues to march towards what is going to happen.
Shout out to the Armenian, who is one of my favorite characters.
I
He is
love
so good.
I love the Armenian so much. The Armenian, is this gangster who is played by this absolutely powerhouse actor,
I
incredible
have no
actor.
idea how to. Misel Matichevich, I think is how you say the actor's name. Yeah, Edgar Kasabian is the character, and he's awesome.
And something that is so great about that character is, I mean, he is obviously someone who is not ethnically German. He's sort of making good for himself in the underworld in Berlin. But he kind of mixes it up. Sometimes he's the antagonist, sometimes he's working with the various characters or various factions. But the knowledge of where his allegiance is going to fall in another decade, I think, is one of the most fascinating things about him as a character.
Yeah, I mean, you were saying you want to see like the Armenian the Gangster versus the Nazis, the like spin-off series, and I feel like there's some mileage there.
Oh, I love him so much as a character. He's so good.
Yeah, it's I mean it's a show that has a lot of incredible characters. I would have to shout out as some of my favorites. Of course, Gary and Roth himself and Charlotte Ritter, the two main characters. Volker Bruch and Livlisa Fries, or however you say her last name, are incredible actors. And I hope, because as all Germans apparently do, they speak English, that they make a jump over to some US based stuff because they're really cool. And also Lars Eidinger as Alfred Nissen, the insane
Oh,
industrialist,
oh
is
my
just,
God, he is
oh, he's
so
bathing
good
in the
at
river of
being
ham.
he is so good at being so hateable, and every season I think there's no way he could get more hateable, and he just gets more and more hateable. He's doing it. Another slight season 4 spoiler. I just love him in season 4 because he's so bad. He does kind of an Elon Musky kind of thing in season 4 that was, I assume, filmed before Elon's current breakdown. But oh man, he does it so well.
I mean, he plays unhinged in a truly incredible way. And yeah, I mean, it's just brilliant. I love it. But I mean, the whole show is incredibly well acted. Looking back through this cast list, which I have open, oh yeah, Frau Benke, Fritzi Haberland is apparently the actress's name. She's awesome. We stand a legend in Frau Benke. Um,
Speaking of Frau Benke, I wanted to say this show and also Karamora, which is, I would say, very, very boob heavy. Lots of boobs in that show. This one's slightly less boob, but I would say a frankness about sex and sexuality that I don't see very often in American period
I think they're
pieces.
just European, Demetria.
Everyone is just kind of casually sleeping around, and I love that. I think an American show would have leaned harder on there are a couple moments, there are a couple of people's affairs that do have an effect on the actual plot, or played more for drama. But there are, I mean, Charlotte, the one of the main characters, actually starts the show working as a sex worker in a club, and at no point does the show treat it like she should be ashamed of her profession, or that she needs to sort of be spiritually cleansed and reborn as an innocent ingenue after that. She just continues sleeping around for the whole show, and that's fantastic. There's absolutely no moral judgment of that choice. I don't think I've ever seen an American TV show go there.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool to see. And I think, yeah, the show is very frank about sex and kind of how that is sort of a part of this society, in a way that feels much more realistic than the sort of weird moralizing that you tend to see a lot of in American shows, for example. The one thing I do find also, I want to, as a historian, introduce kind of a debate I see around this show, which has to do with kind of the legacy of the Weimar period in general. I imagine when you were in high school, and this is kind of the common narrative around the Weimar period, it's kind of portrayed as this very negative time in German history where there's a lot of poverty and instability and just a kind of a period where shit just kind of sucked. And there is obviously something to that. It's also true that that became a big part of Nazi historiography of like the Weimar Republic was this awful failed state, and we're the ones who came in to kind of save Germany from it. And because of that, in the last couple decades, especially, there has been this kind of academic push to try and reclaim the Weimar period a little more and talk about actually, there are some really important things that are happening. There are periods of actual democratic stability in Germany that are then undone by the kind of bad faith actions of monarchists and later the Nazis. There are these like flowerings of culture that's happening, this flowering of women's rights that had not existed under the imperial system. Um, Ironically, a kind of flourishing period for the Jews of Germany, where a lot of the laws that were keeping them socially and politically restricted were kind of going even further by the wayside. Um, and there is truth to that as well. And I like that kind of debate around how should we talk about Weimar is still a very active one among historians. Um, And I was kind of curious when this show first came out. I saw some essays actually kind of attacking the show for what the authors described as an overly negative portrayal of the Weimar period that was kind of playing into this, like, oh, it's just this decadent mess kind of narrative. Um, and I know the producers of the show have talked about this a little bit, that their whole idea was they wanted to show the period warts and all. I certainly think they make it pretty clear that the kind of stance of the show is that the Republic, for all of its problems, was better than what came next. But I do think it's
Well,
kind of wrapped up. Yeah.
just about anything was better than what came next.
Yeah.
That's a low bar to clear.
But I think there is kind of an interesting conversation to be had there about, like, how should we be talking about the Weimar period, and also why has no American teacher of European history updated any of their materials and how we talk about the Weimar period since the 1960s, from what I can tell.
I would say, actually, I would make the argument that portraying some of that decadence is not meant to condemn it. I actually find the cabaret scenes, and there are quite a bit of scenes in cabarets, a lot of them featuring drag performances, both men dressed as women, and actually there's a male impersonator who is a major player in the first season. A lot of that is portrayed almost tenderly. I think there's actually a really fairly kind and wistful lens on some of that, glitz and glamour, and not even glamorous in the way that we often portray the 1920s in America, but it looks like a fun party, but it also there's definitely this atmosphere over all of those cabaret scenes of all of this is about to disappear.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of ties back into the sort of wistful, like the doomed nature of it all, which, yeah, as you said, is kind of hanging over the entire show in this very powerful way. Um, but I mean, I'm just so curious because, like, where the show is at chronologically right now, season 4 is like getting into 1931. The Nazi seizure of power really begins at the end of 1932, going into 1933. So we're there. And I am very curious what season 5, possibly 6 and 7 of Babylon Berlin is going to look like. Everything I have seen so far gives me absolute confidence that it will be handled very well. It will probably also be very intense, and it will take me a little while to kind of work through those episodes when they come out.
Oh yeah, definitely. I don't know if there's any other showrunners I would trust more to handle that something that sensitive, and that difficult to put onto film in a faithful way. It really, watching this show kind of made me realize how much I had been missing in a lot of American portrayals of this time period, and just how much I had been missing in American period pieces in general. Like, something that's really weird that I noticed after I'd been watching this show for a while is people look human. I mean, a lot of them look like very similar looking white German men, but
It
they
is,
haven't.
yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of really gorgeous people in this show, but they have not been cast for Hollywood good looks. They don't have, a lot of them don't have, some of my European friends have pointed out that American cosmetic dentistry gets very, very noticeable when you're watching period pieces as a European. Um, just they look human, they look very grounded, like I said. Doesn't If there is use of green screens in the show, it's very seamlessly blended. People are interacting with real props. They're walking down this street that is a very faithful reenactment of a street in the 20s. Just everything feels very real and grounded, and that extends beyond, props and costumes. It extends into the writing in a really essential way. It is it is really faithful to history, while also having some kind of wacky moments where people get hypnotized, and there are masked killers running through
Yeah.
cinemas,
It
and
leans into some of the storytelling tropes of, like, film and TV from that period too, in a
Mhm.
way that is kind of like, yeah, it actually does provide, I think, a needed sort of tonal break from the darker stuff. and I didn't think I would like it that much, but I really do. And I'm excited to see what happens with the weird evil scientist doctor guy.
Yeah, some of the stuff with the hypnosis and the kind of magical fighting drugs and stuff like that. You're right; they really are reminiscent of the kind of storytelling that would happen in that time period. While also, yeah, there is an entire season set with kind of this murder at the movies situation where someone has been killed while filming what is kind of a Metropolis-esque show. And yeah, the way that narrative plays back into itself as a filmed narrative, they're having lots of fun. It's a really
Yeah,
fun show to watch.
it is truly tremendous, and I seasons 1 through 3 are on Netflix. Season 4 will hopefully be on Netflix at some point, and if not, then I encourage us to all go burn Netflix headquarters down.
Mm-hmm. Oh man, I kind of wonder. Like you said, this show is really frank about Nazi ideology in a way that almost no American TV ever is. I wonder if that is part of the reason why Netflix has been having some reluctance to acquire it, because it is not a comfortable watch. Season 4, it's a really good watch, but not a comfortable watch. And I think Americans in particular, we like a comfortable narrative, I would say, when it comes to history in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder. Netflix certainly has no shyness about putting some pretty heinous shit on its platform. But whatever's going on there, I mean, we spent months like waiting for the. I think the season 4 came out in October of 22,
Mm-hmm.
and it still is not out in the U.S., and that is insanity. Um.
And yet, Amazon could put out shows like Hunters.
Oh God, I'm not watching Hunters because I
I,
don't.
re- yeah, we probably will never discuss that because we will not sit through it.
Yeah, I don't need to watch a weird like Holocaust porn, whatever the fuck that first episode was.
It was like, isn't the twist of Hunters that the guy who's been hunting the Nazis down used to be a Nazi? Because
Or yeah, he's like,
Nazism is just a kind of an allegiance to your team, and he switched
I think
teams.
I think he got face offed or something. I don't really know what. Yeah, I guess it's a cross
Yeah.
face off. Another
Yeah,
great
and then
show. More period.
he was pretending to be Jewish or something. God.
I'm
Anyway,
not gonna
don't.
watch it. I just don't. I don't care. I want what the premise of that show seemed like it was going to be, which was corny 60s and 70s like exploitation films where like marginalized groups are teaming up to shoot Nazis, and not what it actually was, which was an attempt to like I don't even know what I would call that. Like I don't know. It's okay to just have a thing that's just the end of Inglorious Bastards. If you're gonna do that, that's just the thing. You don't need anything. You don't need the like grim fucking like awful Nazis executing people scenes. Anyway, that show sucks. Babylon Berlin is much better. Go watch that instead. And then if there's season 4 doesn't make it to the US, then we riot.
Yeah. Or get very creative with your VPNs. We did some
Or
trickery.
that's also an option. Yeah. Final things I guess to say. No, I think I've said everything I want to say. The show's amazing. The cast is all great. Um, yeah.
Yep. Watch this show. Definitely watch this show. 100%.
Until next time, folks.